Hello.
The broadcast of the public safety briefing will now begin.
Good morning. My name is Mark Ruff, and I am the city coordinator for the city of Minneapolis. I want to welcome everyone to this planned briefing this morning on a topic of significant public interest to our policymakers, our businesses, our community partners and stakeholders, and especially all of our residents. We have reserved up to 90 minutes for today's briefing, which will include several specific presentations from key city departments, and will conclude with the time for questions from our council members. So I would ask that our council hold on questions until the presentations are completed. Before we get started, I'd like to note that this briefing includes the remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the provisions of Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. I'd also like to remind folks that this briefing is being live streamed from the city's website, which can be accessed at minneapolis.mn.gov/council TV, COUNCIL TV. It is also being broadcast from Comcast channels 14 and 799. This briefing is being recorded, and we will upload the recording for public access at the city's YouTube channel later today. The agenda and the slideshow are already posted for public access at the city's legislative information system, accessible at LIMS, L-I-M-S, minneapolismn.gov. With those preliminaries out of the way, I'd ask that our city clerk note council members in attendance just for public awareness. This is not a regular or special meeting of the city council, nor of any of its committees, and we are not tracking attendance, nor do we anticipate any formal actions. This briefing is a status report for policymakers and the public to build shared awareness of the city's plans and preparations for the upcoming trial of Derek Chauvin. I would also like to add that we as staff, city staff, are approaching the next 2 months as a group of public servants who are changed by the events of the past year. We're changed not only in what our work is, but how we do our work. And those changes are imprinted by the memory of Mr. George Floyd and by the words and direction of our elected officials and our leaders in community. How we hire people at the city, how we think about racial equity and the impacts of racial equity on proposed council actions, and how we interact daily with each other and the public is different. These changes take time, but they are real. Change also in the last year reflects robust conversations with our legislative delegation, the governor's office, Hennepin County, and many other partners. Our bonds are stronger because of these honest conversations. And most importantly, with increased humility, we as staff are better listeners to community. And we will be listening and adjusting over the next 2 months. You will hear more about these feedback loops today and in the coming weeks. With that, I'll ask the clerk to note the council members who are with us at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. I show that the following council members are in attendance for this briefing at this time. From Ward 1, Councilmember Kevin Reich. From Ward 2, Councilmember Cam Gordon. Ward 3, Councilmember Steve Fletcher. From Ward 5, Councilmember Jeremiah Ullison. From Ward 6, Councilmember Jamal Osman. From Ward 7, Councilmember Lisa Goodman. From Ward 8, Councilmember Andrea Jenkins. From Ward 10, Councilmember Lisa Bender. From Ward 11, Councilmember Jeremy Schrader. From Ward 12, Councilmember Andrew Johnson. And from Ward 13, Councilmember Linnea Palmisano.
All right, thank you, Mr. Clerk. And with that, I'll ask the technical team if they'd please display the PowerPoint slides so everyone can see the presentation. I'm also honored to introduce our Police Chief, Chief Arredondo, who will take the next step of the presentation. Please, Chief.
Thank you, City Coordinator. Good morning, distinguished council members and to the listening public. I am very honored to be before you today, along with Commander Scott Gerlicher from my team, to provide a overall briefing in terms of the public safety and plans for the upcoming trial. This plan, as we have called it, is Operation Safety Net, and it really is centered on two main areas. Prevention, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our city, all four quadrants of our city, our residents and our businesses safe, as well as making sure that everyone who wishes to practice their First Amendment constitutional right to peacefully protest, demonstrate, and gather, that they can do so free from harm, free from intimidation, and that their safety needs are met. I also just want to say that while we will talk at length about prevention and certainly the First Amendment protected rights, this is also woven into communication. And I'm a firm believer that you can never over communicate in matters such as this that impacts our city. And so we've done a great deal and will continue to do a great deal of communicating this out and also listening, whether that be to our members of our faith leadership communities, our young people, social workers, our schools, our neighborhood leaders, and of course our business and residents. I also want to just say I appreciate a lot of feedback that I've personally received from community members as it relates to their thoughts, their views, their concerns, and even some solutions that they have raised in terms of how we continue to move our city forward, not only just in terms of this trial, but as we move it forward into 2021. So I want to continue to say thank you for the great city and our community members that have taken on that. First slide, please. So as I mentioned, Operation Safety Net, that you're going to hear some more details here about, is about preserving and protecting lawful First Amendment, nonviolent protests and demonstrations. And that we cannot echo that enough, that we need to ensure that everyone, regardless of their position, can exercise their First Amendment rights peacefully and free from any sorts of harm or threats to their safety. And secondarily, it's about prevention, preventing to make sure that our neighborhood stays safe, our business community stays safe, and we cannot allow for destruction of property and damage to property or fires and looting. And so those have been kind of the core anchors to Operation the Safety Net and the planning. Next slide. Council members, the other thing that we've been able to do, which has been an advantage, is we've had time and communication. We've had time to plan for this since last July. The structure of Operation Safety Net is built around a unified command structure. So what does that mean? While the trial itself will take place in the heart of the Hennepin County Government Center, and so the focus will be certainly in Minneapolis, we are bringing in resources from around the state, and those are both local, state, county, and even including our National Guard soldiers. And so all of these different assets and jurisdictions will play a key role in the safety of our city, and we'll have a chance to coordinate real-time communication. And so we've had a chance to plan for Operation Safety Net since July of last year, and I can't tell you how much of that timing has been very critical and crucial to having a plan that I feel very confident in. That timing has also allowed us to, again, do a lot of outward-facing communication that you'll also hear from other city enterprise partners as we move forward. Those are just some of the agencies that have been mentioned. Obviously, the Minneapolis Police Department, Sheriff Hutch and his team at the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, through General Mankey and the National Guard, State Patrol under Colonel Langer, Metro Transit Police Department under Chief Frizzell, and with the coordination efforts of Commissioner Harrington from DPS and Homeland Security Emergency Management. While certainly there is a focus here in Minneapolis, we also have assets and resources across the river in East St. Paul with an East Metro agency coordination team that'll really be anchored by Chief Axel of the St. Paul Police Department and Sheriff Fletcher from Ramsey County Sheriffs. And now, council members, I'd like to have Commander Gerlicher kind of walk through the operational planning and phases of Operation Safety Net. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And if I can, thank you for advancing the slide. Yeah, it's my privilege to be here to speak with everyone this morning. My name is Scott Gerlicher. I'm a commander with the MPD. And we wanted to just talk about the operation itself. And we've really taken a look in the planning for this operation in really 4 components. Phase 1 being what's happening right now. And that's everything leading up to the beginning of the jury selection, which is scheduled to begin 1 week from today. And that kicks off phase 2. That's the jury selection and the trial. As far as scheduling goes, the jury selection will again begin on Monday, March 8th. And then testimony, opening arguments are set to begin Monday, March 29th. We will obviously, the resources that we have available to respond to anything are available during all of these phases. But most of the resources and most of the deployment of the additional law enforcement and National Guard that you'll see throughout the streets in Minneapolis really is focused on phase 3. And that's the time the case goes to closing arguments so that all of our resources are out deployed prior to any verdict coming out from the jury on this case. And that's phase 3. At this present time, it's difficult to ascertain, but we believe that to be mid to late April, depending on the cadence of the trial itself. And then we will be in place and ready to prevent and restore any issues until we are no longer needed. That could be a period of a very short time, or however long that needs to be, we will be there. And then we would enter into phase 4, which is our demobilization, and really try to return things to normal. If we can scroll to the next slide, please. So as the chief mentioned, we have both prevention and response resources, and I'm going to touch on those today. These are really key, these prevention resources. If you think about what happened last May and June, we took a look at some of the challenges that we had, and our prevention resources are really trying to address most of those particular issues. Let me first talk about our property protection detail. And that's being out visible, protecting those key business corridors throughout the city of Minneapolis. And by that, we do mean all areas of the city of Minneapolis. We took a very close look at the problems that we had last time, areas of the city that were significantly damaged or destroyed. Our goal is to be out there and present before anything would happen. And by that, we mean having law enforcement officers, both from Minneapolis as well as some of our mutual aid partners, along with the Minnesota National Guard, out and visible, interacting with the folks in those communities, just being present to prevent any type of looting, fires, anything that we saw again last time around. We have significant resources dedicated to this. Of the almost 2,000 National Guard that we will be using for Operation Safety Net, 2/3 of those soldiers will be dedicated and assigned to this particular property protection detail. Next is our critical infrastructure protection detail. I'm sure everybody has seen some of the fencing and barricades that have gone up to protect our government campus area downtown Minneapolis. We also have teams of law enforcement officers as well as National Guard that will be present in those areas just to make sure that we don't have any problems or any type of damage to those key facilities, both downtown Minneapolis as well as some of our other larger facilities like HCMC and other facilities around Minneapolis. And then our fire EMS security teams. One thing that became very clear is that our fire department, whom we'll hear from shortly, had significantly compromised ability to respond and put out some of those fires, especially early on in the riots of last May and June. Similarly, our EMS crews had difficulty responding for emergency calls for service in some of those high risk areas. So we have teams of National Guard soldiers as well as law enforcement officers who will accompany our fire crews along with our EMS crews out so they can quickly and safely respond to any type of emergency call or fire anywhere in the city of Minneapolis. And then our police precinct security details, just like with our critical infrastructure where you're starting to see and have seen fortifications going up, we will be doing similar temporary fortifications consisting of cement barriers and fencing at each of our 5 police precincts, with the goal being to protect those precincts and to protect the officers who will be coming and going from those areas. All of our 5 police precincts will be fully operational during this period of time. And these are teams of dedicated soldiers as well as police officers above and beyond those precinct security officers who will be out answering 911 calls just to make sure that none of our buildings is compromised. And then a group we're calling Tactical Traffic Control, which is going to consist of both National Guard soldiers and Minnesota State Patrol officers who will be out in areas where there's crowds in the streets, pedestrians, police officers. We saw some very dangerous situations last May and June, especially at night, where we had vehicles with blacked out headlights driving extremely fast within inches of pedestrians out on marches and protests along with police officers. The job of our tactical traffic control group is to set up a cordon, if you will, around those particular demonstrations that may be taking place on our streets to try to prevent vehicles from entering into an area that could compromise public safety. So those really sum up our prevention resources. As I mentioned, most of these prevention resources really won't take effect until phase 3, which again is the closing argument stage of the trial. So we have some time, but these are very, very important to our operational success, these prevention resources. If we can now switch to the next slide. The chief mentioned the operational command structure that we have in place being a unified command. On your screen, you see the patches of all of our major partners that will all be in the same room. We will all be sharing those resources together and making command decisions about public safety issues. Having said that, the responsibility for all operations and command and control in the city of Minneapolis rests largely with Chief Arredondo and the Minneapolis Police Department. All the other agencies there will be supporting us, and we will be mutually supporting them. We're very used to operating in this unified command structure, and this is really no change from the way that we've operated for other major events that we've had, such as the Super Bowl. Next slide, please. In addition, we have mutual aid assistance that I'm sure you've heard about, and we are entering into some mutual aid agreements with some other agencies other than those that you saw on the previous screen. These are law enforcement officers from the metro area and across the state of Minnesota who'll be working with us via mutual aid. They'll be helping us out primarily in some of those prevention resources. This helps us because that also frees up our Minneapolis police officers to make sure that we still maintain capability to investigate crimes, answer 911 calls, and utilizing our own MPD resources and that of our partners to help manage any crowds or civil disturbances that could be taking place. Next slide, please. And then keeping people safe and protecting property. This is what it's really about. You kind of see 2 columns here. They're not in any particular order of importance, but each column is very important. On the left, you see the types of activities that we encourage, and that's all those peaceful First Amendment rights, gathering in public areas, peaceful assemblies, on street corners and in the streets, marching other than on a freeway. Those are all the sorts of things we want to make sure the public is aware. We have no intention on taking any type of enforcement action or in any way preventing these activities that are encouraged. What we really are here for is to try to protect people and keep people safe by taking enforcement action and really trying to prevent those unlawful activities that we saw, unfortunately, so much of last May and June. Setting fires, damaging property, assault or riotous actions towards anybody, and illegal weapons, throwing objects. These are all things that we just cannot tolerate and that our operation is designed to address. So Those are the types of things that our entire operation will be focusing on, as those unlawful, those violent activities, not any of those that encourage First Amendment free speech activities on the left. Next slide, please. Very good. And then we'll turn it over to Chief Tyner with the Fire Department.
Thank you, Commander Gerlicher. Thank you, City Coordinator, and distinguished members of the council. The fire department's response for any type of civil disobedience and our preparations for the Derek Chauvin trial revolve around the plan to have a task force response should any civil disturbance break out. A task force, let me first explain, is a pre-assembled response unit, which includes 2 fire engines, 1 ladder truck, 1 battalion chief or a task force leader, and a security component to assist the group with getting into and out of scenes safely. The security component has either members of law enforcement and or the National Guard, and Commander Gerlicher did talk about that for a little bit. For this event, it will be the National Guard. The strategy behind the task force response is to respond from a staging location as a single unit, all those rigs together as a single unit, effect a quick extinguishment of the fire, and leave the scene all together. Everybody gets in safely together, everyone leaves safely together. Next slide, please. We do have a staffing plan for the event. Our normal staffing is a minimum of 102, but when we get to phase 3, we will staff up all our rigs to 126. And I do realize that 102 and 21 don't add up to 126, but there were a couple of command staff positions that were eliminated from the slide. So 126 is what we would be staffing up to. That would give us 4 on every engine that we have in the Minneapolis Fire Department, 6 on Heavy Rescue 1, and all the task force leaders we would need to fully deploy the task force response up to 8 task force groups. If necessary to expand our response capacity, we could do additional hire backs to staff up spare rigs that we will have pre-staged and pre-equipped to add additional units to our response capacity. And we also have mutual agreements in place to provide assistance from outside fire departments. Next slide, please. We have built up our command assignments and presence. We will have representation in the Unified Command that both Chief Arredondo and Commander Gerlicher had mentioned earlier. We'll also have representation down in the Minneapolis Emergency Communications Center to make sure that the task force are deployed responsibly and correctly. We'll also have representation in the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, and we will also have PIO representation in the Joint Information Center. All of our command and support functions have been built out to be able to conduct sustainable work cycles in the case of a long or protracted event. Next slide, please. We've also put together a communications plan to make sure that everybody is aware of what is going on and what the current situation is. City leadership will receive daily briefings from myself. The duty deputy of each shift will give a morning briefing with their battalion chiefs and task force leaders. My assistant chief of operations, Ray Cruz, or the Unified Command will also be giving a daily operations briefing. All members of the MFD not on duty, this is something that we identified from the last event. They were kind of left out in the dark. They will receive daily briefings via virtual platforms such as what we're on right now. And most importantly, the public will receive briefings from the PIO group via the Joint Information System. Next slide, please. So just a few notes. We will be on our normal shifts, which as you may or may not know, firefighters work 24-hour shifts, and we have a C shift that actually works there 2 24-hour shifts in a row. So that's 48-hour shifts. As you can imagine, people could get really worn out doing a task force response during that time. So we will be switching out those task force and rotating them as needed. Any additional resources needed at any particular event will come in a task force form. So what I mean by that is that if a task force is at a fire and they don't have enough resources there to handle the fire, instead of just sending out one extra engine or one extra truck to assist them, they will get an entire second task force to assist them on that event. The National Guard will have our radio frequencies, our MFD frequencies, so that we're able to communicate back and forth effectively. And any decision to suspend EMS will have to come from myself or the Assistant Chief of Operations, Ray Cruz. And when I say suspend EMS, I mean the fire response to EMS, so that we can concentrate on fires. The paramedics will still be responding to EMS events. We just may not be responding with them depending on the situation. Finally, task force leaders must get approval from the Unified Command prior to using an aerial device. So what I mean by that is that oftentimes we have big fires, we will put up an aerial device and use that to deploy master streams, large volumes of water on the building. However, with the task force response, a big part of that strategy is being able to get in and get out quickly and safely in the case of civil unrest or if things start to go south. So putting up an aerial device isn't really conducive to that strategy, and so we are not allowing people to use that strategy of using an aerial device without prior approval. Next slide, please. Thank you. That's all I have, and I will now pass it on to neighborhood and community relations, communications, and violence prevention. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief Tyner. We have next Greta Bergstrom, our Director of Communications. Turned over to Greta. Thank you again, Chief.
Thank you, Coordinator Ruff. My thanks also to Chief Arredondo, Commander Gerlicher, and Chief Tyner for the introductions on public safety preparedness. My name is Greta Bergstrom. I am the Director of the City of Minneapolis's Communications Department, and I'm here today to walk through the city's communications infrastructure, the infrastructure that will be delivering operational and public safety information throughout the trial period. What you'll see before you is a slide, kind of a graphic of the Joint Information System and how this system, which is quite extensive, will be organized and operate. As Chief Arredondo introduced in his opening remarks, we want to make sure that people are safe. At the end of the day, we want to make sure people have the information they need when they need it to make decisions. A joint information system is a system that integrates incident information cohesively to provide accurate, timely, and coordinated information across multiple jurisdictions. Our joint information system is composed of communications staff and public information officers, PAOs, of local, state, and federal levels. Specifically at the local level, obviously the City of Minneapolis and Hennepin County. The goal, of course, is to facilitate information sharing on public safety, transit and traffic operations, street closures, operational information, and making sure that we are getting information out to communities, neighborhoods, businesses, information that could affect how they operate or what might happen in those corridors in areas. We want to make sure that people have the information that they need so that they can exercise their First Amendment rights to demonstrate and to peacefully protest. Through the structure, there's really three broad operational areas. The first, of course, Chief Arredondo had walked through a bit, which is Operation Safety Net. That is unified command and law enforcement communications throughout the incident. The second broad area is trial operations, and that is being handled through the Hennepin County District Courts and the Hennepin County, and that will be working through Judge Cahill and regarding the trial information. And then, of course, there's the City of Minneapolis, and that is led by the city's communications department. I will be serving as the lead PIO throughout the incident. We are working to provide information to community in 4 sections. The first section is media relations. We will have media relations and field support throughout the trial period. There will be information, the information products section will consist of developing and vetting and verifying public information so that messages can be created and can move out. And that could be an update on traffic, that could be an update on a street closure. It can really run the gamut. Information gathering will, of course, be listening to community, listening to social media, working directly with Incident Command to make sure that we are aware of concerns, aware of new updates and information that must be shared. And then we have a very robust community relations section of the Joint Information System. And that section will be working through 3 big facets within the City of Minneapolis. The first is the Office of Violence Prevention through Director Sasha Cotton, who will be the second is through Neighborhood and Community Relations and Director David Rubador. And the third is getting information out and shared with our business community through the small business team at CPED, Community Planning and Economic Development, through Director Eric Hansen's team. Next slide. The Joint Information System has multiple channels that we will be sharing information to community and external partners. We, as of a couple weeks ago, have started weekly press briefings on trial preparations and community resources. We will continue with weekly briefings throughout the trial period. It is possible that we will include additional briefings as needed, and so those weekly briefings could turn into twice a week or 3 times a week briefings or daily briefings as the situation presents itself. We will also be providing weekly informational articles and news pieces that city elected leaders can share with their constituents through ward newsletters and other mechanisms, social media. We will also be providing twice a week updates through our public newsletter, which goes out every Wednesday and Friday. So additional information will go out through that external channel. City social media, we have robust followings on Facebook, on Twitter, Nextdoor, Instagram, and we will make sure that we are pushing out information through those channels multiple times a day throughout the period. We have cultural radio programs that have been ongoing for 3 or 4 years at this stage. The programs are an opportunity really to share information about city resources, programs, and information such as calling 911, parking information during snow emergencies, understanding the role of city inspectors, and learning about business opportunities. Radio program listeners are able to call into those programs. So again, it's a 2-way communication channel. They can ask questions of city staff anonymously and in their own language. The city has expanded these monthly and bi-weekly programs during other major events such as the Super Bowl and the Final Four in the past, as well as elections and the 2020 census last year. As we increase the amount of information to share, the city will plan to expand the frequency of these regular programs again in the coming months, and offering the same types of public safety information and making sure that we are amplifying that information through these programs. And again, those are on KMOJ, KALY, La Raza, and WIXK Hmong Radio. We have a new website section going live this Friday, March 5th. that will provide links to Operation Safety Net, to the Hennepin County District Courts information, that will provide city resources and information, that will also provide links to the city's social media channels and public newsletters, so people can sign up for those additional channels to make sure that they're receiving information daily. We have an internal employee FAQ that will go live on our intranet City Talk also on Friday, March 5th, and that's a resource for our internal staff. It's important that the city workforce is coordinated and well informed so that we are delivering consistent messaging. And then again, with the Joint Information System, we have been working together for a number of weeks and months with our external and internal partners. We have been meeting weekly and we'll be expanding to meeting 3 times a week starting next week, March 8th. Next slide, please. There are a few key ways that we want our residents and businesses and visitors to contact the city. The first is to call 911. We want to reserve the 911 phone line for life safety emergencies. These are emergencies requiring immediate response from police, from fire, or EMS. And so we're asking the public to please call 911 as you would when it is an immediate emergency. We also have an MPD tips line at 612-692-TIPS. This line is reserved to report suspicious activity that is not requiring immediate response. Last summer, what we saw was people did not know who they should call or what numbers they should call. And it was a fast-moving, very dynamic situation. Lots of concerns, of course, in community and neighborhoods. We are going to do a better job of communicating who you should call for what, and making sure that these resources will also be online. But we want to make sure that if it is a car driving really fast through your neighborhood with unmarked license plates, or you see something suspicious in your alley, that you are not calling 911, but you are calling the MPD tips line to report that information. Business and property owners that have questions regarding advanced preparation before the trial, business operations during the trial, and general information regarding regulations and resources should call the small business team at 612-673-2499 or email smallbusiness@minneapolismn.gov. And finally, for non-emergency city information, again, information about city departments, about different non-emergency information, please call 311. And we want to reserve, again, 311 specifically for that information so that our call center agents can help navigate city business. Next slide. And now I'd like to introduce David Rubidor, who is the director of the city's Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bergstrom. My name is David Rubidor. I'm the director of the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. I just want to say good morning to all the residents, businesses, and our city council members this morning watching our presentation. As Director Bergstrom mentioned, we are working, the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department is actually extensively supporting the work of the Joint Information System. Many of the channels of communication that you refer to, our department is actually working to augment that and help get that kind of information out. We're also supporting other department efforts as well, such as the Health Department and the Office of Violence and Prevention. But what I wanted to do this morning is to be able to highlight a few of the strategies that we're doing that are led directly by NCR. Our ultimate goal here is to really create multiple channels to share timely and accurate information and resources with the community and really build in two-way communication channels. So the intent here is to, as Director Bergstrom mentioned, is to get information out to the community in a timely, accurate way, but at the same time understand what's happening in the community in real time so that the city is informed, and just really working with our community partners in order to be able to achieve that. So I have a few examples I'd like to go over. It's been a little bit of time discussing. The first of which is our neighborhood organizations. The city of Minneapolis currently has 70 neighborhood organizations, which basically cover all the residential areas of the city. We know that our neighborhood organizations have trusted relationships with the residents and businesses and understand meaningful and impactful ways of sharing information. They've been doing this kind of work for years. They also have and know how to have impactful ways to address local needs and situations that are occurring directly on the ground. So with that, we want to be able to support our neighborhood organizations in a meaningful way and with the upcoming work with the trial. So what we are committed to do is to continue to provide neighborhoods with accurate information, trial updates and city preparedness updates, such as details about public safety and traffic plans and other resources as needed. So in order to do that, we're going to actually engage 3 different strategies with our neighborhood organizations. First of all, we are going to be hosting weekly meetings with them. These meetings have already been set up. Neighborhoods have already been notified. It's a strategy that we have found to be very effective. Basically provides a forum for neighborhood organizations to be able to share what they're doing and what kind of activities they're doing on the local level with each other, as well as being able to share it directly with the city. We're also, that gives us an opportunity to be able to share information directly from the city back to the neighborhoods, as well as bring in any subject matter experts that are needed in order to help facilitate some of their concerns, as well as for us to be informed about any unmet needs that they might have. The second thing that we're going to do with our neighborhood organizations is to send out at least weekly emails to them with the most relevant updated information regarding the trial and community resources. And then the last thing that we'll be doing is to be able to connect our the neighborhood associations directly with the joint information system that Director Bergstrom was referring to, so that they're receiving information directly from the city in real time. Should the need arise, we'll also be able to adjust this schedule or this cadence of meetings to increase it or decrease it depending on the situation in our community and be able to address the needs. To a large degree with our neighborhood organizations, they have extensive contacts, they have extensive relationships with the city. They have done, over the last year, dealing with the civil unrest and COVID, have done some excellent work. They know their communities. We will rely on them to be able to inform us about what is happening, and we'll meet with them in the ways that they want to meet and provide the information that they need. So strong focus on really supporting that connection. The second thing I want to talk about is the crime prevention specialists. So last December, the City Council approved moving the city's crime prevention specialists from the Minneapolis Police Department into the work of the NCR department. Our crime prevention specialists also have extensive relationships with community businesses, community-based organizations, or neighborhoods, really with a focus on addressing crime and safety issues. And so, although this work is still in transition and the crime prevention specialists are still moving into the department, we will be incorporating 2 of the crime prevention specialists directly as liaisons with the joint information system. So there's a direct connection between the work that's going on with the joint information system as well as our CPS staff. The intent of that is to making sure that the information and the communication that they're getting from community is relayed directly back to the city, and that we're also able to share information through their networks back to the community. In essence, between these 2 groups, we feel we have large reach in being able to communicate the messages from the city and also informing the city about what's happening in real time in our community. We also will have the CPS sit directly with us when we have the neighborhood organization meetings that I mentioned previously, and having them be part of that as well. Third thing I want to talk about is accessibility, and this is we have vendors lined up that have been secured to provide translation and interpreting services in Spanish, Somali, Hmong, and Oromo. So the messages that are coming out from the joint information system, we will be able to translate that into the various languages, really trying to ensure that everybody in our city has access to the information. And then ongoing support from our NCR staff. In addition to the aforementioned networks that we have, our city staff, our NCR staff, work extensively with community-based organizations, neighborhood organizations, various partners that are out there. They will be in constant contact with understanding what our community needs, being able to convey city information out to the community that way, as well as being able to receive information back about what are the needs, what are the issues that are existing across our city, and be able to include that back into the joint information system to address that. So I also would like to take a moment to address the recommendation to use the social media influencers as part of the joint information system strategies, what's referred to here as the cultural community partners, or social media partners. So NCR made this recommendation to the joint information system. In our experience, we have heard repeatedly that many residents are not connected to the city's traditional routes of sharing information, and we often hear from residents that they were not informed of significant information or resources that are available. So with this, we are constantly seeking out ways to make sure that all of our residents are informed of timely and accurate information in ways that are meaningful to them. For this strategy, we use the term social media influencer, which in retrospect did not accurately reflect what we are asking of our partners, and it caused confusion in the community. This was never about trying to persuade or change public opinion about any particular message, but more it was about getting important information out quickly and in an equitable way. Knowing that information such as interruptions to transit routes, building closures, street closures, security infrastructure downtown, and other types of information will impact our residents who are just trying to get to work, take care of their families, or access important resources. We move forward with this recommendation, trying to seek additional ways to reach all of our city residents. We also have heard over our experience that from communities that if we ask them to help the city in doing their work, we should honor that work and compensate them for that work. While I believe in and support the intention of this recommendation, we have seen that the impact has caused harm in our communities, and for that I am sorry. We acknowledge that we have caused a harm, and we will work to repair the harm that was caused by this strategy. So at this point, we will not move forward with the strategy. NCR will continue to bring forth recommendations to the joint information system with the intention of the city doing better to reach all of our residents in ways that are meaningful for them, but we will not pursue the cultural social media partners. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Coordinator Ruff.
Thank you, Director Rubidor. Appreciate information from you and from Director Bergstrom, and very comprehensive. And I think also, as I mentioned earlier, indicative of the feedback mechanisms that we will be taking into account as we go on. And I think we welcome as staff suggestions from not only our elected officials, but from community directly to be able to reach communities who don't use traditional media, or who have a language barrier, as Director Rubidor indicated. And also be quick to say that when we make a mistake, we acknowledge that and we will do better. And that is the work of the city, is that feedback mechanism to improve, because we have improved over the last year, but we know we still have a long way to go. So I just want to thank you for that directness and the honesty, and certainly look for those recommendations from community and from our elected officials. With that, I would like to ask Commissioner Gretchen Musenkamp, who is the head of our health department. And for those not familiar with the health department, the Office of Violence Prevention is embedded in our health department, and would ask Commissioner Musenkamp to address the plans of the health department for the next 2 months. Please, Commissioner.
Thank you, City Coordinator. I'd like to start, if we could go to my first slide, please. Thank you. Just with a regrounding, and I think City Coordinator really touched on this when he started us off, but I'm going to say some things about reminding us kind of the environment that we're in. The killing of George Floyd was traumatic for people across our Minneapolis community, and the events that followed his killing last year further traumatized many. And for many, both the killing of Mr. Floyd and the events that followed underscored long-standing community traumas. So For that reason, it's critical that we as a city are working with community, as you have heard we are, for planning and activities as we strive to keep everybody safe, respond to needs in a trauma-sensitive manner, support community efforts, and collectively work towards healing. And so the Office of Violence Prevention and the Health Department have been directly involved in that work. Next slide, please. To describe our planning and coordination, the Office of Violence Prevention Director Sasha Cotton is co-chairing a subcommittee on community and business engagement through the state's Operation Safety Net. And we are also, as you have heard, working collaboratively with neighborhood and community relations to ensure that the unique and diverse needs of stakeholders across the city are incorporated in our planning. Our engagement is working towards the goal of establishing geographically focused stakeholder leadership groups with the purpose of coordinating a two-way communication. These groups are intended to include representation from cultural communities, the business community, faith communities, neighborhood level groups, organizers, and others. And the focus is on ongoing stakeholder engagement. Next, please. Thank you. So the City Council approved funding for an approach that we will be initiating this week. And so we will be issuing a request for application process, an RFA process. Through that process, several community organizations will be selected for the city to enter into contracts with for up to $175,000 each. The total amount for all contracts will not exceed $1,050,000. Following the RFA process, the city will enter into contracts with the selected service providers. A list of the selected service providers will be submitted to the council in a final report. Highlights of the RFA include: funding will support a network of community-based groups that can be activated during periods of heightened community tension during the remainder of 2021, including the trials of the former officers who are standing trial for the killing of George Floyd. Community-based groups' skills and credibility position them to effectively conduct proactive and responsive community engagement, communicate accurate information to community, and share resources with people in community. These groups will not be expected to and will not provide any law enforcement duties. Some groups may have distinct areas of focus. For example, geography or a specific community, with that community being broadly defined. Others will have a broader citywide focus. A priority will be placed on funding groups that are culturally responsive, groups that have existing credibility and reach within communities, and groups that have the infrastructure and organization in place to take on this effort. A comprehensive process that incorporates input from various parts of the city enterprise is anticipated in the selection of these groups. Next slide. I think that covers what I was talking about already. And so the next slide, thank you. Additionally, we have made arrangements to have porta potties and hand sanitizer stations additional to the ones that are there added at 38th and Chicago in anticipation of community gatherings there once the trial begins. And we have also arranged our COVID-19 response, looked at using our logistics team to make sure that we have the capacity to supply masks for COVID safety during community gatherings, and we certainly do. That's the end of my presentation, and I certainly will be here for questions when we are all completed. I'll turn it back to you, City Coordinator.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Musicant. Next in the presentation is from our Community Planning and Economic Development Department. And this is Director Eric Hansen, who oversees our economic development work. Yeah. Eric, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. Good morning. My name is Eric Hansen. I'm the city's Director of Economic Policy and Development in the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development, or CPED. Next slide, please. Minneapolis is open for business, and for those thinking about where to shop this spring, please choose local first. Either due to the pandemic, the unrest, or both, businesses have faced an unprecedented amount of challenge over the past 13 months. Trial aside, we will need to work together if we want our favorite local businesses around after the pandemic, and must make our local purchases at those businesses first. With the impacts of last year's unrest still visible, businesses and property owners have asked the city what they need to know to keep their businesses open, their properties secure, and their workers and customers safe. Addressing this request starts with all of us gathered here today. Our CPED team has cooperatively worked with the other entities in this briefing to review what went well and didn't go so well in last year's unrest. These learnings include reviews to our communication approach, resource allocation, and response coordination. In many cases, the lessons we learned from 2020 provided opportunities for improvements, but it still had a few strong points. One of these known strengths is our relationships with community-based organizations. During this year's planning process, CPED has been actively developing the messaging you'll hear today directly with business owners, business associations, and business technical assistance providers. We are learning from their questions what is important to them and how we can be more effective if unrest occurs again this year. Community leaders have expressed anxiety over the uncertainty of the coming months, especially as many businesses disrupted in last year's unrest have only recently reopened. Community leaders want to be more involved with the development of strategies, advise on any tactics, and have active roles in any response through improved communication channels. Through our partnership with these community-based organizations, we are developing a set of frequently asked questions as a repository for information for the business community. This will be a living document with updates coming as needed. We plan to share this information contained in it repeatedly in an effort to reach as many people as we can. The first version of this FAQ will be on the city's website when we see the updates that Director Bergstrom announced earlier, and we will proactively push this information through the city's many e-newsletters this week. Next slide, please. The FAQ will include our initial advice to businesses and property owners who may choose to take additional actions in preparation for the trial period. Our first recommendation, and what we think is advice for all businesses regardless of this year's circumstances, is to have a plan. A readiness plan is a good practice for any business to prepare for any contingencies like winter storms, power outages, or other natural disasters. We recommend businesses consider their overall emergency preparedness plans now. Ready.gov has sample plans for businesses and can give you a sense of the questions to consider in the development of this plan. Businesses might want to consider adding physical security measures such as boarding or permanent security gates. While the city is not recommending these security measures for all property owners, businesses and property owners may choose to board their buildings during the period of the trial. Boarding is not required but can be an inexpensive way to prevent potential damage. The city also now allows for permanent retractable security doors if business choose that route. Permanent doors require a permit. For those interested in a permanent door, please call 311 to start that process. We are asking all businesses and property owners to check in with your insurance companies to make sure your policy is up to date. We also want people to understand what your insurance policies cover. The city is able to provide assistance in this review of your policy through the Business Technical Assistance Program, or we'll be able to refer you to the Minnesota Department of Commerce, who has oversight of the insurance industry in the state. Our small business team at 612-673-2499 or email smallbusiness@minneapolismn.gov for more information. We ask that the businesses protect critical, personal, and business documents. Please consider uploading electronic copies of these important documents and records that might be in your business to an online cloud service such as Dropbox or Google Drive, and consider bringing physical copies to an offsite location. Additionally, we recommend businesses continue to build connections with their neighbors and local community-based organizations like a local business association. It is important to share contact information and collect that information from your neighbors. Think about having that information in writing or in a cloud-based format too, in the event that the device you're using to store the information runs out of battery or is otherwise inoperable. Having this information on hand when you need it will be helpful. Those who want additional security personnel and choose to go with security companies, please fully protect yourself and property by only hire licensed security personnel. These are people who will have their own insurance and have the training you'll need. Again, the city is committed to working with business and property owners to continue their operations as normal as possible through this uncertain time. We thank the businesses and community groups who helped develop the advice we are providing today, and will provide more information and regular updates as needed. Thank you, and I turn it back to you, Mr. Ruff.
Thank you, Director Hansen, and thank all the staff for a very thorough presentation of information. We are going to open it up to questions. And before I turn it over to council members for questions, I just wanted to ask Director Bergstrom, that you had highlighted that public newsletters are available and that briefings will be occurring. I'm wondering if you can just, for those public who don't already work closely with city staff or with their council members, how do they access being able to get on the email lists or the newsletter lists, and how can they watch briefings after those briefings are finished?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. We do, so for the weekly briefings, the weekly media briefings, or any media briefings that we'll do, there is playback on the city's YouTube channel. So the City of Minneapolis's YouTube channel will provide playback of those press conferences. We are also including those in newsletters, the public newsletters, city's social media as well, that you mentioned. In terms of the city's public newsletters, those go out on Wednesdays and Fridays, and we will be posting the link to sign up for those newsletters on the city's new webpage that will be dedicated to these resources, and that will be going live on Friday. We are also, again, pushing that out through the city's social media channels. I will say that, just to be specific, the city's website is minneapolismn.gov. The city's social media accounts, where you can follow us and find links to these briefings and other information. Twitter is at City Minneapolis, spelled out. Instagram is at mpls.gov, or I'm sorry, at mpls.gov. Facebook is City of Minneapolis government page. And we are also on YouTube, the City of Minneapolis's YouTube channel. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Coordinator Ruff. I just had a couple questions, I believe probably for Commander Gerlicher. So I'm happy to just start with my questions if that makes sense, or I can wait to make sure it gets online.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Commander. So you mentioned that there was going to be a property protection detail. So I just wanted to have a couple questions on that. How does a business, some of these businesses have been hit by crime a number of times in the last year. How do they know that they are on the property protection detail?
That's a very good question. We have worked on kind of a matrix, so to speak, and taken a survey look at all the areas of Minneapolis that suffered significant damage last time around, and our goal is to try to, in some capacity, cover all those corridors. We don't want to commit or release exact locations of exactly everything, because it is a fluid situation. Many of these patrols will be moving around in multiple block areas. So I hate to overcommit by promising we will have police officers or soldiers 24 hours a day at a specific location presently. But we will do whatever we can to make sure at least those business corridors and areas that we're talking about receive additional information as we get closer, so they have some expectation of what to expect in their particular areas. And again, we're talking business corridors. We're not talking residential areas. These are all commercial corridors throughout the state of Minneapolis, sir.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think it's also, my question was more a matter just to make sure that some of the business corridors, especially in my ward, are on that list. While we are much further from downtown and from where the trial will take place, we're only 10 blocks or actually 8 blocks from George Floyd Square. So I know that my business owners want to know, just to make sure that they're on the list. We're not, I don't know that, we understand that you have to be very flexible in your plan, but I think just making sure that when you're doing those patrols or are ready, they want to know. So is there some way we could make sure that a couple of those nodes are on that list? I understand you don't want to release it publicly, but is there some way I could make sure?
Yes, if you or others would like a little bit higher level of specificity, you can certainly contact me via email. I will do my best to try to better explain in a little bit more detail the areas that we're talking about, sir.
Sure. And I have one other question. So just recognizing the injuries that were inflicted on numerous members of the media last year by MPD, I want to know how law enforcement is working to ensure that members of the media have full access and safe access to do their jobs during the trial.
Yeah, great question, and I can try to answer that. Other than that, I know Director Bergstrom may have some additional information. I know that's been a topic for our media folks as well. Greta, did you have anything that you would want to add?
Just at a high level, obviously the Joint Information System is going to be working hand in hand across the city with the county on trial operations and with Operation Safety Net on incident information provided by law enforcement. It will be a fluid situation, and we will continue to share information internally, and then of course push that verified accurate information back out through various channels across the Joint Information System. I'm not sure if that answers the question or if there's more information.
It does not answer the question. Last year, members of the media were blinded by non-lethal projectiles from the Minneapolis Police Department, and I'd like to know if we're seeing a situation like that, what procedures have been put in place? How have you talked with the media to make sure that nothing close to this happens again?
Councilmember Schrader, Chief Arredondo here. So one of the conversations that we are doing and will continue to do is having conversations with our local and some of our national media, and probably even international media that plans to be in town. Media credentialing is a big piece that we learned from last year, and making sure that we can readily identify those folks who are going to be covering the trial and maybe out there in demonstrations. The other thing that we're going to be really impressing upon local, national, international media is certain things to watch for. We know that the vast majority of demonstrators will be peaceful, but we do know, and we've learned certainly from last year, as well as most recently at our nation's capital on January 6th, there is always the possibility that you can have individuals who have a different mindset, bad actors who will come in and try to hijack that moment and commit crimes. And so giving them information is what they can expect. When law enforcement is, for example, giving dispersal orders, after those 3 dispersal orders, what they could reasonably expect, whether law enforcement will go in and give citations, make arrests, or the possible use if crimes are occurring and there's a need for gas munition. So all of that information and really trying to communicate that to our local, national, and international media will be very important. The credentialing piece was a big one, and I know that there's already been some conversations with some of our local news producers and directors, and I've had conversations even with some of our local cultural media groups in terms of how they can be identified, how they can get that proper credentialing, even conversations about being able to have those producers and directors and folks get text messages to their journalists embedded in those groups that if situations are occurring that are threatening public safety, to try to remove them out of those situations so that we can minimize any sort of risk to their personal safety. And that will continue to be ongoing.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Council President Bender.
Thanks, Mr. Ruff. I see a lot of council members in queue, and I know there'll be a lot of specific questions. I think I just wanted to take a step back and just offer some reflections that mirror a lot of the comments and questions that I make privately when we've been talking about these preparations for the last many months. You know, I appreciate and I see and I want to note that we have seen a bit of a shift in today's presentation. I appreciate the acknowledgement of the pain and trauma that was caused by George's death last summer. You know, but in the months of planning for this and in many of the public communications that have happened recently, I just don't think that we all have a shared understanding of what happened last summer. And that is that 4 Minneapolis police officers killed a man in a horrific way that led to international protests and that caused immeasurable pain and trauma in our community. And George Floyd's murder has led to enormous policy change around the country. You know, the response to his death has echoed around the world. And I just still don't think that the city is really stepping up to meet the moment. And even in the basic acknowledgement of that as the starting point for everything that happened last summer. Because after his death, law enforcement escalated. They shot non-lethal rounds at members of our community and the media. We saw videos of people being, you know, shot with chemical irritants out of the car of driving vehicles. I had constituents who were on their own porches who were being shot at with non-lethal rounds during curfew. And that exacerbated so dramatically the trauma and pain of our community and led to more protest and more of the you know, enormous outcry that created the conditions for folks in our community who wanted to come from outside. It created the conditions for folks to come from outside our community to cause more harm. And I just don't think that until and unless every single city leader in our community acknowledges that fundamental beginning point and how much it is related to the trauma of all of the other racial disparities that our community sees, all of the other inequities that people have been experiencing for so long and exacerbated by the pandemic and the economic crisis that is part of the outcry from our public. I still think too many city leaders, despite all of this, dismiss the work to create a different system of safety as childish or silly. That too many city leaders think that the most grown-up response to a problem is always with force and always to begin by sending people with guns. And I just don't agree. I don't think that we can police our way out of police violence. So again, I'm heartened to hear some of the plans starting to acknowledge the pain and trauma that our community has experienced. I'm heartened to see NCR, for example, so very clearly address the feedback that has been gathered about the one small element of the communications plans to acknowledge the harm and to shift. I hope that that two-way communication is authentic, that throughout this spring and summer and beyond that the city will start to learn from past mistakes and to begin to lead with compassion and support from our community members who are suffering trauma, who may be protesting not for some sort of random reason that fell out of the sky, but they're protesting against inequity, against police violence, against the trauma that the city itself has caused. I also just want to acknowledge, I mean, I think it's been very publicly stated and clear that there's pushback against council members being involved in giving feedback to plans. And I think shutting council members out inhibits our community's progress because council members are speaking for their constituents. That's why you're hearing a lot of the same feedback from our members of our legislative delegation, from neighborhood organizations, from community leaders. We will work better together if all of these voices are heard. I know that we have to have better plans in place for first responders to be able to get to people who are in need. And I appreciate the planning that has gone in to making sure that fires will be able to be put out, that coordination has happened, that is strong, that is important. You know, I think the problem is that planning has been going on for 7 months, and the additional supports that have been starting to get put in place for community members have come so much later, so that we're not leading from that place of understanding the city's role in causing this trauma and addressing that from the beginning. So I just want to say, you know, on behalf of my constituents, I appreciate the shift in tone that we did see today. I encourage all of the staff at the city and all of our leaders at the city to start from that place of acknowledging the city's role in trauma, to see supporting our community as fundamental to moving our city forward and to our safety and to the safety of all of the people in our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you much. I have about 5 questions, so hopefully I can ask them, and there's somebody who can help answer. The first one has to do with the Jersey barriers and the fencing and the barbed wire that's around City Hall and the Government Center. I'm wondering how much all that costs.
Councilmember Gordon, I don't have an exact cost for you, but we will certainly send that out to all council members in the short period of time after this call.
Do we know who's paying for it?
Councilmember Gordon, the security fencing was done in cooperation with Hennepin County, and the city is responsible for its share of the fencing that is around its buildings, and it is the county is responsible for those around its buildings. And then, as you know, the City Hall is a shared cost between the city and the county through the Municipal Building Corporation.
Okay, so it would be interesting and probably helpful to understand exactly how much the city is responsible for covering those expenses and how much they are. I'm not sure that they're a lot of money, but I often know that when the government is trying to purchase and use those things, costs get pretty high, it seems. I also noticed it seemed like more and more of the plaza across from City Hall is now being separated with an additional fencing. I'll just put this concern out there that it's going to be difficult for people to understand if they do want to gather near the Government Center, where to go. My other question is, will the Government Center be open as usual so people can go inside? And will City Hall also be open so people can go into the rotunda and use the public facilities and conduct the regular business that we conduct in City Hall? Or are there plans to close those?
Councilmember Gordon, I'll certainly ask Commander Grilliker to follow up, but generally on your specifics about the access to buildings, it's my understanding, and this can be verified by contacting Hennepin County, my understanding the Hennepin County Government Center, it will not be open starting this week, and so that only employees working out of that building for the next 2 months will be county employees who are working directly for the trial. Otherwise, their operations have been relocated to other facilities. City Hall will be open during regular business hours. Access will be more limited on the 4th Street side, but we will have access to that building during business hours. Commander Grilliker, anything you want to say about the plaza or anything about building hours as well?
Yes, thank you, sir. So there are areas to obviously gather and demonstrate both on the, I guess it'd be the north side of the Government Center, as well as on the south side of the Government Center. The fencing that you do see in place will be there throughout the trial and afterwards. The fencing that just went up over the weekend was placed by Hennepin County to better protect that facility, and that facility as of right now is closed and secure that being the government center, and it will remain that way throughout the entire trial. So only those that are directly affiliated with the trial will have access to Hennepin County Government Center. And City Coordinator Ruff is exactly right. The City Hall will be open, however, public access will be restricted in the coming week or two to the 4th Street side of City Hall. There will be no ability for folks to gather in the rotunda or anything, but there is certainly business that goes on at City Hall that will continue throughout the entire trial. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's quite an inconvenience, I'm sure, for a lot of people to have the government center closed for the length of the trial. I'm also wondering, in terms of response to protests, I know when we saw some, and it's easy to make judgments about these things after the fact, I guess, but what many people perceived as overreaction. In fact, Councilmember Schrader articulated some very specific examples about what happened to media and press personnel because people weren't effective. I guess we weren't effective in de-escalating things in the past. Are we giving any extra de-escalation training to the public security personnel that we're bringing in to potentially try to manage this situation? And if so, who's providing that and how much are they getting? If I could get a little more on that, it would be helpful.
Yes, Councilmember Gordon. So one of the advantages that we have this time around is time and planning. And so many of our different mutual aid partners, there's state requirements for de-escalation training and crisis intervention training. So many of those agencies have continued to receive those for their own licensing, but also we're having conversations as mutual aid partners as to expectations or guiding principles. One of the things that's very different from last year now is, for example, with the large-scale demonstrations or protests, if in fact there should be a request to use gas, for example, that request has to come through for me for my authorization. There's going to just be a lot more. We're really taking our time to make sure that we're doing everything we can from that preventative piece. Having conversations with activists, having conversations with organized groups in terms of what our expectations are. I know that many are aware of situations involving demonstrations on the freeways. Since that time, even the last couple of months, we've had a lot of outreach and communication with organizations as to what are the expectations of State Patrol. And what they can expect in that. We've had conversations about what are dispersal orders and what can be anticipated after those dispersal orders are given. So we're continuing to have a lot of outreach, a lot of communication. I will tell you that just in the past couple of months, some of the outreach that we're doing, I know that Director Cotton is Sasha Cotton from OVP is not on the line here, but we've been having a lot of conversations with our communities. I've personally have talked with the Lake Street Business and Community Nonprofit Councils, Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors, Downtown Improvement District, our Unity Community Teams, our African American faith leaders, our Minneapolis interfaith groups, our public schools. Schools will be open and operating at that time. The Latino business leaders, Minneapolis NAACP. I don't believe that we can ever over communicate, so those expectations are important. Also, I want to just take a moment to say that it's not always just about what we can expect from community, but what the community's expectations are from us who are going to be wearing these uniforms, making sure that all of our public safety folks adhere to our Minnesota Law Enforcement Code of Ethics that highlights that we have a fundamental duty to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property, protect the peaceful against violence and disorder, respect the constitutional rights of all people, and in making sure that we're enforcing laws courteously without fear or favor, regardless of what color uniform that our community members see out there. And so the real-time communication is going to be important. I mentioned earlier about journalists, the important role that journalists play in our democracy and being able to capture and record history, but making sure that they do that safely, making sure that they also have the configuration and outline of the plaza and what that's going to look like for gathering spaces. That they also, matter of fact, we just last week, General Mankey of the National Guard had representatives talking with members of Little Earth community. There were National Guard soldiers who were operating in and around Little Earth last year, and for some in that community that was traumatic, but they've had ongoing conversations now. As General Mankey reminds me, 400 to 500 of the Guard, the men and women, are from the Minneapolis area, and they make this their home, and so they have a connection. And so building these relationships now and throughout this trial and moving forward is going to be very important. But we're certainly continuing. Our folks have had the ongoing de-escalation training, CIT training. There's a temporary TRO in place with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, as I mentioned again, that talks about when certain less lethal tools can be used. And so that's going to be a lot different from last year.
Will the officers be equipped with rubber bullets like they used at the 3rd precinct?
There will be less lethal tools out there, but before those can be utilized, there's authorization that has to come from me. And so, again, these are lessons learned from last year. There's protocols in place now that I think that will be really helpful. And again, if we think about in the context that if we know that the vast majority of folks that are going to be gathering are peaceful, we really want to make sure that we're doing all we can to dissuade any bad actors or people that would want to cause harm and come into our communities to cause harm, to limit, prevent, and mitigate that from occurring. And a good piece to that is working with our community members who are going to be out there peacefully protesting. And some of those have reached out to me and said, Rondo, if we start to see some of those folks try to embed or hijack our peaceful demonstrations, we're going to let you know. We're going to physically separate ourselves from that so that you can have a clear discernment of who's causing problems and who's not. And again, last year we were more reactionary. We didn't have the opportunity to do that. But this year I think we're on better footing because of the relationship piece that we've been doing over the last several months.
And I also think it's important that we recognize that sometimes a group of people can even help self-monitor and control those. So I've been at many gatherings, and it's been the group that's standing there calms down somebody, has somebody leave, and so they're doing a lot of self-management. But that's difficult to do when law enforcement is escalating the situation and all of a sudden decides that they need to almost attack everybody who's near that whatever. So I really appreciate all the work you're doing and coordinating and communicating. I think that's going to be really critical. In fact, I think that was one of the reasons why the 4th precinct, there wasn't that violence back in 2015, I believe, when after Jamar Clark was killed by police. So that coordination's important, but I don't know if it's going to happen and if it could happen with everybody. And obviously it didn't after the killing of George Floyd during that protest, when there were individuals who decided to escalate things, and rather than figuring out a way to de-escalate ourselves, target the individual or preserve whatever we needed, the safety around the vehicle. I understand one of the reasons we ramped everything up, and I may not have all the accurate information, was because some of the cars were broken into, police cars, and we were concerned about that. But we have to have a way, I think, of figuring out how to do a better job of isolating people who are causing problems and not end up actually hurting people who aren't and who actually could be part of the solution. And that's what I hope we can really focus in on. I'm also really concerned about law enforcement agencies coming in from far away and what kind of tools and weapons they're going to have and be authorized to use, who might not have as much training. And how are we going to make sure that they're positioned appropriately in the background if we feel like those who are better skilled at managing a crowd and de-escalating things should be in the forefront of that effort. So you don't necessarily have to respond. And I do want to say that I appreciate all the work that's gone in proactively to trying to do the best you possibly can with this from everybody. And I'll just end with one last question. I just want to get clarity. We said we are no longer going to be paying individuals to share city messages on social media. I believe that's what I heard Director Rubidor say. Is that correct? And maybe
That's correct, Councilmember Gordon. I'll just, if Director Rubidor or Director Bergstrom wants to add anything, happy to let them weigh in.
Yeah, Councilmember Gordon, I don't think I think what Mark Ruff, Coordinator Ruff just said there, your interpretation is correct. Yes, we are not moving forward with the social media partners. And so we have stopped that.
Great. Okay, just wanted to clarify. That seems like it could be a little bit of a lead story for this meeting. Thank you.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that we're getting to the end of our time, but I do want to ask. Chief Arredondo mentioned the January 6th insurrection, and I think it's very important that we're clear about the difference between white supremacists attempting to overthrow our government and peaceful protesters. And I think it's very important that those things be approached with a clear analysis about what each of those things represents as a public safety issue and as a context for our city. And I think people are looking for reassurance that we're not going to be treated as a threat when expressing First Amendment rights and being out there, and that we're not going to be treated as the people who are doing the worst thing if provocateurs do show up to try to co-opt peaceful protests. So I guess I'm wondering, Chief, if you can speak a little bit to, or Commander Gerlicher, any training that MPD officers and our mutual aid officers have received in differentiating between white nationalist insurrectionists who are trying to overthrow our government and Minneapolis residents, members of our community who are trying to express themselves. And then if you can reassure people about who, whether it's the FBI or us or however it's happening, is monitoring communications threads among folks who have shown that they actually do want to do harm to our government. Are we monitoring to make sure that we would know if they were planning anything in Minneapolis, and who's responsible for that work?
Yes, Councilmember Fletcher, thank you for your question. And just for clarification, I mentioned January 6th in terms of at least the reports that continue to come out from that event, and certainly there's be after action reports. The planning and preparation was key, and so I mentioned that we've had the ability now to have time to plan, and whether that's securing critical infrastructure, that's an advantage to us as a city, that we've had the time and planning to secure and make sure we're doing all we can in that regard. No, the vast majority of our community members throughout last year and this year are demonstrating peacefully. We are working closely with the FBI in terms of the intelligence, and that has been part of the phase 1 planning that's been going on for several months now. We're fortunate we have such a good relationship with them. So the intelligence gathering, making sure that we're aware if in fact members of extremist groups, white supremacist groups should come into our city. We want to make sure that we get that information timely and that we can do everything we can to prevent harm again to individuals or a city itself. And so they will be embedded, meaning the FBI, that intelligence apparatus, will continue to be with us throughout the duration of the trial, and we'll be working closely with them. As of today, as I sit here this morning with our council and our community, there's no actionable intelligence that there's any threats right now to the city of Minneapolis related to these trials or otherwise. And so that is a good thing, but we'll continue to obviously keep monitoring that. As far as training, Minneapolis Police Department, we've had training in the past regarding identifying hate groups and recognizing those as opposed to, as you mentioned, just civilians who are demonstrating for whatever cause they have. We've had that. I don't have in front of me today all what the other agencies may have had as it relates to identifying extremist groups or hate groups. But we can certainly try to get that information. But we've certainly, as a department, we've had courses related to that. But we will continue to work closely with not only just our federal partners in terms of intelligence, but we learned last year some of the first intelligence that we received were from community members who saw vehicles driving in the area associated with different groups, vehicles darkened out and no license plates, and whether that was Broadway Avenue in Minneapolis or Lake Street in East Phillips. And so, and even today, our federal partners are still apprehending individuals who fled the state, who caused damage last year, who are associated with some of those groups. So, so that piece is very key. But yes, discerning, gathering intelligence in terms of what individuals are associated with hate groups or white supremacy groups. Yes, that needs to be ongoing, and making sure that we're not ever associating that with the general community and city folks who are going to be out there demonstrating.
Thank you. I really appreciate that update and that response. The one other question I have, which is probably for Commissioner Musicant, is I appreciate that you're thinking about restroom and hand washing facilities at 38th and Chicago. I'm wondering, thinking about, obviously, we've got a lot of fencing set up at City Hall and the government centers, which suggests that we're expecting a crowd and that we're prepared to control people if they get out of line. But I wonder if you can speak a little more to anything that we're doing to care for people's health and wellness while they're downtown, especially given that probably just about every publicly accessible facility will be closed and subject to new security measures. Are we thinking about porta potties and hand washing stations and other kinds of sort of necessary comforts to accommodate crowds downtown while we simultaneously lock everything down?
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher, for that question. That was a topic of discussion last week as we talked about preparations, and I have since heard from City Coordinator Mark Ruff that he has been a part of some conversations to address that need. City Coordinator, would you be able to answer or help answer that question?
And Councilmember Fletcher, just to add that we are working with our downtown partners for that planning, as well as with Minneapolis Police Department. And so we don't have exact plans that we will lay out, but understand absolutely the concern that you are raising and are very aware of our responsibility as a city.
Thank you.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you. Going back, and I'm not sure who this is a question for, but to the Unified Command Structure and Joint Information System, we had conversations about non-emergency lines, what to call 3114 versus 9114. And thank you for acknowledging that there was tremendous confusion last summer as to which lines to call for what, and it seemed to keep changing. So I really am looking forward to that posting of who to call for what, and I'm wondering, and haven't yet heard, will there be expanded hours for 311, or to give people a sense that somebody is picking up or taking messages off of these non-emergency lines, and I'm not quite sure who that's for. That's all I got.
Bergstrom, I'm going to take that question.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Palmisano and Mark. At this stage, 311 will be under normal operating hours, working through 7 o'clock on Fridays and then back on again Monday mornings at 7 a.m. They are exploring options if needed, obviously, for fuller coverage on the weekends, and we can definitely report back to you on that. Otherwise, as I had laid out earlier in the slide, calling the MPD tips line to report suspicious or concerning activity that doesn't require that immediate emergency response from police, fire, or EMS is important. And so that is one resource. And then, of course, a specific resource for business and property owners so that they can get the help they need from the small business team in a fairly quick way is also another resource. And then, of course, 311 for the standing city information, city department information. At this stage, there isn't another hotline being stood up, so there isn't kind of an additional hotline being stood up. We do want to make sure people are going to those existing resources, and we will make sure to be very clear about who to call for what, when, and then we'll be sure to share additional information if there are new resources for specific reasons as the situation arises.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Mark. I have a few questions, and then I just kind of wanted to, make a few points. One is, given what our response appears to be, very police heavy, very the barricades, obviously, I would assume that we at least have a plan for if in the event of a curfew. And I had a few questions about that based on some of the legal support groups that I've heard from. In the event that there is a curfew, I know that there are a couple of organizations that do legal support, and they have questions about how they can still be out and providing that legal support in the event of a curfew, and we just want some clarity. And I'm hoping to get some clarity about how they can distinguish themselves and hopefully not be arrested themselves for breaking curfew if they're out trying to provide legal support.
Councilmember Ellison, thank you for that question. So I know that the last couple of demonstrations and gatherings, there was a group from, I think they were attorneys or, but they were monitors, and I believe they also had some sort of identifiable, whether a lanyard or credentials or something, and so that would be helpful again if that, and I'm making an assumption that might be the group you're referring to, or, but if there's any, if there's any groups like that, I think if we can get that information so that we can have that in the unified command, and whether, you know, if I recall last year, they not only were they at the location of some of these events, but then they would show up at the jail, Sheriff Hutchinson's jail. And so if we can get that information, if there's a contact person that we can have for our unified command to have that information, that would be helpful. And if there's other organizations like that, if we could get that information, that would be helpful. And we can have a liaison person to work with them.
Cool. Who's the best person to steer them to? Would that be Commander Gerlicher?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Great. I know that, yeah, they did have identifiers, but I know depending on who they ran into, whether it was sheriffs or MPD, they got different responses. So hopefully we can just get a uniform response, no matter who the jurisdiction is. The other question that I had, and this is just more for clarity for myself because I don't know, some of the legal support groups had heard that that only felony level arrests would be ending up at the jail, and that if there were other arrests that fell short of that, that folks might be processed somewhere else. Is there any truth to that? You know, can folks still depend on going to the county jail if they feel like someone's been arrested or detained, or is there going to be a secondary site where folks are processed? I think that question comes out of during the highway arrests, folks were sort of dropped off at random locations and not one uniform location. And so I think there's some groups trying to get ahead of that.
Yeah, Councilmember Ellison, that's a great question. So I think they're probably thinking about that last situation at the highway. So no, it's not just for felony or arrests, and we have not made any deviation from that. But in the event that, you know, and I feel a little bit out of my lane just because Sheriff Hutch runs the jail there, and I know that there were conversations that he still has regarding the health of the inmates and the staff there with COVID and those types of conversations, but we have not deviated from that related to felony or misdemeanor. We have obviously many of these situations where they have been more of the misdemeanor level. There's been citations in lieu of arrest, the physical transporting of people, but we would certainly be able to communicate that out if there was a different change in terms of that, or if we were transporting people to the jail or others to another location, we would certainly try to make sure that communication got out there. But as of right now today, there's been no deviation from that process.
Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate that. And I will say that as these things have come up in the past, your office has been incredibly responsive, whether it's AC Jose or whether it's DC Force. So I appreciate that. And I'll try to get you that information, and I'll be in touch with Commander Gerlicher about who with the National Lawyers Guild or the Legal Rights Center might be wanting to connect. You know, the other thing I'll say is that I am a little bit, and this isn't necessarily a direct question, but I have been a little bit disappointed with the heavy seemingly police only focus of this plan up until today. We haven't really heard, or I feel like I haven't really heard, and I certainly know the community feels like it hasn't really heard a plan that affirms the kind of trauma that happened this past summer, and not just from the 4 officers who killed George Floyd, but from the response that happened afterwards. And I just want to remind folks that we are still in an ongoing pattern and practice investigation, and that is not limited to the behavior of these 4 officers, but expands to the ways in which people's civil liberties were violated, expands into the ways in which we've had members of the press not only injured but maimed by our police force. And when I look at this plan, I'm a little bit concerned that we didn't necessarily learn those lessons as well, that we're struggling to kind of hold the entirety of what happened this summer. And I believe the council president talked about how we don't have a shared understanding of what really happened this past summer. I've asked a couple of times, what is the basis for our plan? I get the reason to have a plan. We saw a lot of unrest and we saw a lot of damage. That is a reason to have a plan, but it is not a basis for one. And I feel like I haven't really gotten an answer to that question. I know that in my last conversation during our private briefings, someone from MPD leadership mentioned Rodney King, and I felt like I didn't really know if reaching back that far and both spatially and temporally was really relevant to what we're facing and was really relevant to the context that we have right here. And so I actually went looking for a more relevant context. Who else recently has faced the kind of preparations we're trying to make, the kind of cataclysmic event that we're faced with. And I kind of landed on Laquan McDonald, the murder of Laquan McDonald at the hands of Jason Van Dyke. It was a video that was really horrific. It was a murder that really rocked the city of Chicago. And it was a trial that the city of Chicago felt like they had to prepare for. And that trial was just in 2018. And I thought, okay, well, that might be a high profile killing of a community member, of a young Black man, and at the hands of a white police officer. That might be a more contemporary case study for what our preparations should look like. And so, and I just want to read to you really quickly what the trial prep for the trial of Jason Van Dyke looked like. And this is from a 2018 article out of the Chicago Tribune. Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson told the Tribune last week that officers who respond will be wearing regular uniforms and will be following protest events, allowing peaceful demonstrators to unfold. Johnson said that the public will not see officers deployed in military-style clothing or riot gear unless the need arises. I hear a lot of talk about the military presence and that we're going to have preemptively, and I fear that is more likely to invite the kind of chaos that we're hoping to avoid and to protect our residents against. I'll read just one more other thing from this article. Johnson said the department was not expecting any problems based on what authorities were hearing. And that goes back to my question of, what are we hearing on the ground? Recently I read in a recent article that folks on the ground feel like they haven't really been hearing from us. And so if folks on the ground aren't hearing from us, then how can our plan have any basis for what people are feeling on the ground? We can't make a plan that is rooted in what happened after the Rodney King verdict in LA in 1992. I think that we should make a plan that is a little bit more specific to our time and location. And I feel like I fear that we haven't done that here. One of the other questions that I've seen coming from community members is I've gotten this question: does the city already know the outcome of this trial based on the preparations? It seems like the city knows the outcome, and I have to, it does take a lot of energy to tell people, hey, look, this is not coming from this plan is not being designed by the attorneys taking up this trial. This plan is being designed by the city with a basis that I don't fully understand, and that I feel like no one's really been able to explain to me. And I also just want to say again, we have this ongoing pattern and practice lawsuit, and from what I can see, we have a problem this past summer that was created in large part by the police, and now we're saying that the police are the only thing that can protect us from that, and I think it's incredibly disappointing. Since we've been sitting here, I've gotten a text message from a constituent who said, what does peaceful protest look like to the police when people are hurting and when people feel like they are in a fight for their life against the police? And I think it's a good question, and I don't have an answer to that. I don't know what registers as peaceful protest to the officers who are going to be out there, and I do fear escalation, and so I'm going to hope for the best. I do plan to sort of be present for my ward and to continue to try to connect with community members and ensure that people aren't harmed, whether by people coming into the city to create chaos, whether by our police department themselves or by some of our mutual aid partners. But I do have a lot of fear around escalation, and I guess I'll just voice that I haven't seen too much in our plan that that is pointing us towards de-escalation. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you to Councilmember Ellison. Councilmember Kano.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. I first wanted to thank the Lake Street Council and the Latino business owners and the chief of police who have been getting together to talk about these preparations and what to anticipate and how to manage the flow of information and response. So I was able to be a part of a conversation in Spanish with the chief on this, and really hope that that's something that we're replicating with other cultural communities throughout our city. I also want to say that last year I was incredibly just thankful for the work that the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department did, specifically through its community outreach specialists when Lake Street was burned down. I think that those strategies and resources and relationships that NCR holds are so vital to help us not only respond in the moment, but to continue to build that capacity that our city as a whole needs to hold us through the next 12 months. I do believe that, you know, we as city employees, as city leaders, we do this work with community, and I certainly don't expect any directors or any staff members to take on these next couple of months on your own. I really hope that we can continue to double down on the work that we've been hearing about and seeing here relating to building those relationships and that communications. So I will say that I have confidence that the Spanish-speaking community on Lake Street is more prepared and certainly obviously more prepared than last year. And there's been a lot of work done through NCR and through Mariano Espinosa specifically with those business owners on Lake Street that are really about trust, about people, about relationships, and not just about sort of this kind of one-dimensional communications piece. This is really much more dynamic, and it's much more rooted in cultural practices, in the ebbs and flows of the daily life of those communities. And I hope that that we can hear similar stories, such as Mariano's stories, happening in the East African community, in the American Indian community, in the Hmong community, in the African American community, through the work that NCR leads. So I know that having a strong relationship between NCR and MPD is going to be vital to support our communities through the next months. I do have one specific question And it relates to a request that was made last year by myself and multiple leaders on Lake Street, which was to essentially help protect Lake Street from damage and the fires that were out of control by closing the street to foot traffic and to other vehicles that were, as we know, just driving around doing harm throughout the city. And that protection never took place. And so I'm curious to hear, who are we supposed to submit that request to essentially close access to Lake Street, both foot traffic and vehicle traffic, and who, who's kind of the decision maker on that? Is it the chief? Is it the mayor? Is it the governor? Because that was really unclear last year, that these sort of requests kind of would go into this amorphous enterprise decision-making process, and we would never hear back, like why that couldn't be done, or why it was gonna be done, or why it just never even got heard as a request. So I anticipate that will be another request, especially if burning down of buildings starts to happen again on Lake Street, regardless of whose buildings they are, whether it's U.S. Bank or the small business store owned by an immigrant on the corner. It doesn't really matter whose building it is. That doesn't, in my book, justify burning down of property on Lake Street. And so we really want to be able to know, who are we supposed to send this request to, and who's in charge of making it happen. So maybe, I don't know if that's a question for the chief, or for Commander Gerlicher, or for Mark Ruff. Happy to take a response from anyone.
Yes, Councilmember Cano, thank you so much for your question, and certainly your leadership with the Lake Street Council and Latino nonprofits the other day. As far as your question regarding street closures, as of right now, our plans right now anticipate our city continuing to function, streets being open, even downtown where the trial is going to be held. We are not anticipating right now blocking off any streets, whether it's 3rd Avenue or 4th Avenue. We want to continue to keep those open. And so right now there are no plans to have street closures for whether it be Lake Street or Broadway Avenue. Now, in the event that there's information that we are receiving that for the public safety of those neighborhoods in East Phillips, that it would be advantageous from a public safety perspective to close the streets, that information, whether we're receiving it or community leaders on the ground or members are receiving that on the ground, we'd want to get that to Commander Gerlicher. But and then that decision would again be based upon the public safety need to do that. And certainly last year, certainly the residents have said that was a concern, and so that's why they had wished to have that request made. But as we go into this right now, we do not anticipate closing off any streets, but in the event there's information or there's things occurring out there in those neighborhoods that residents or businesses are believing it would be helpful to close those streets, we'd want to get that information to Commander Gerlicher for a unified command to assist in that. Yeah, what we don't want is, if we have to do that, we don't want residents taking it upon themselves to either use their own personal vehicles, to use makeshift barriers, those types of things. We really want to make sure this is done in a manner that we as a city are monitoring, that it's in the purpose of public safety, and that we can go in there to try to resolve a situation peacefully if it's requiring even the request for a street closure. Is that helpful, Councilmember?
Yes, so just to be clear, this city has full authority to close down these streets to protect the people and the physical presence of the corridor.
That is correct, Councilmember Connell. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I think we should think about that scenario and have it in our toolbox, because without having something to protect the corridor, what we saw was then people arming themselves. And I don't think that makes anything safer. More guns by more people in a moment of crisis isn't going to be more safe for people. And that's exactly what happened last May, early June. So I would say that we should really consider intervention methods to try to ensure that that destruction doesn't happen again. And as you know, it evolves overnight. You know, on Wednesday, the council members were thinking one thing. By Friday morning, everybody was in a completely different situation. And so things change very quickly during a moment of crisis and need. And so I appreciate that we're not leading with that to be alarmist, but I do think that we owe it to ourselves to be prepared with certain scenarios. So I would encourage you and your team to really think through what that would entail and what that would mean, so that I don't have to take calls from business owners saying I'm buying guns and we're getting guns on the street because nobody's helping us. I'll end my comments with some reflections to share with city staff here. You know, our office is here to be a partner with you in this work and to provide as many resources and connections as possible to troubleshoot as the days and weeks and months come to us. And so literally out of the ashes of the burning of Lake Street last summer, we saw maybe 5 different cultural groups form and establish themselves since then. And so it ranges from the Lake Street Latino Business Association to the revamping of our sister city association group, who does a lot of cultural work on Lake Street, to the Somali Chamber of Commerce, to now reconnecting with the Somali Museum. And so there's a lot of social capital that we have there with these folks, and our office is working to make sure that the leaders of those organizations are connected and communicating on a daily basis as the days come when the trial begins. And so I will just offer to you those connections, relationships, and resources, that trust that those people have put in us, because we were on the ground, just like NCR was on the ground when the crisis was happening, that we need to be able to sort of share that built trust and share that energy that we've invested in being, you know, sort of the front lines of response to a lot of these things with you. And so I just want you to think about the different cultural groups and multilingual groups that have formed and established and grown and are showing up to conversations since last summer, and to be able to connect with them and lean on them and think outside the box. Don't just go to the regular people that you always know. Try to really connect with those other resources. And as a city, we should consider investing capacity in those groups, because the more shared capacity that we build and we invest in, the more problem solvers we will have on the ground to be able to sustain our city through whatever might come. If it's another pandemic, if it's another housing crisis, if it's another instance of white supremacy, oppression, and structural violence against communities of color. These are long-lasting investments that are built on the bones and the blood of people, and their sacrifice and their tears and their pain and their hopes and dreams, which is really what I see in people today, is they want a better city and they want to build that better city with us. So I just want to express and offer my office's support to make sure that you're all connected to those different cultural leaders and communities on Lake Street, to make sure that our strategies are strong and sustained and rooted. So thank you all for your hard work on this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Kano. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for this public briefing. I think it's really important that we have this information out on the public record for folks to be able to have clear information, because we have not been able to communicate in, I think, the ways we as the city, but also as elected officials, being able to communicate with our constituents about the details. So I do think that this is very important. So I do want to say thank you to Councilmember Goodman to make sure that we have this particular space etched out for us to have this conversation. You know, we're getting this briefing at this point, so it's, you know, it's too late, obviously, for us to push a reset or to be able to make any sort of real substantive feedback that will help shape the plan in a different way. You know, but I will just say that I do feel like the fundamental lesson was not learned by the city overall from last year, which is that our primary responsibility is to care for the people of this city, and to be able to create a city in which people feel so cared for, that they feel heard, that they feel respected, and that they don't have to engage in riots or destructive behavior in order to feel heard. And so I think that is, just a concern that I'm carrying as a council member, that this planning process has been underway, I think I heard 7 months, and that was largely during that time focused on law enforcement response, and only about 2 months have, like a little bit less, I think, than 2 months have been focused on community needs and community engagement and community support and outreach. But I do want to be clear, though, that while MPD should absolutely be thinking collaboratively about how we keep our city safer, not only in this case, but more broadly with safety overall, I do think that they are not responsible for having to coordinate a response. Like their area of focus primarily is law enforcement, and so there has been a gap in really thinking creatively around how do we get to the outcome in which our community feels so cared for that we don't need a heavy-handed response to be able to keep the peace, and have a plan that centers people rather than property. And I think that this plan is. I think this plan is what has been pulled together. I see the obvious work that has gone in, city staff. You all have done really great work, and so I want to just be clear that this is not a reflection on the work that you have done. You've done what you were directed to do. So I have a question for Director Bergstrom. It's good to know about the communications infrastructure, but are there plans for just something as simple as like a broader FAQ? Because I'm just a little bit concerned that I saw an FAQ was released by the Downtown Council before I saw something directly from the city. So do we have anything like I know we're gonna have a website, but is there gonna be like a one-stop shop like FAQ for easy access to kind of basic information?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Cunningham, and my apologies. I may not have mentioned that as a specific item for that website, but yes, there will be an FAQ that has been in development over the past few weeks that will be a part of that website as that launches on Friday as well. And we can get that out internally to council members as well, just so you have that standalone FAQ. And I should also say, also my apologies, and it was brought to my attention that when I was walking through the Joint Information System graphic, that you as council members in the city clerk's office are also listed in the system, recognizing that you have a constant back and forth with your own constituents and businesses in your wards. And so the Joint Information System is also a support system for that information that we will also be getting out to ward offices and to individual council members and to our policymakers, including the mayor, and for ward offices that will come out through the clerk's office, and so that we will have a more seamless way of answering the questions that you and your constituents might have, and then being able to source that information internally and get you the answers as quickly as we can. And so I just wanted to recognize that as well, that you do play a huge role, obviously, in that public information dissemination, and we are here as a broader information system to help support that as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I know it's kind of a very specific detail around, will there be an FAQ, but that's been a question that I've been asked. So I just wanted to make sure that we got that covered. So thank you for that. So, you know, the last time that we had, like last summer, what we just saw was there was, generally speaking, neglect, a protection gap that we had to deal with in North Minneapolis, that we as non-law enforcement had to really fill those gaps in order to keep our critical infrastructure protected, our small businesses. And, you know, a lot of folks are still carrying a lot of trauma from the white supremacy terrorism that we faced, with our Black-owned businesses being burned down, with the caravans of headlights off, no license plates, zipping through residential areas, the harassment of folks. I mean, it was a lot of folks really have struggled with that. So, you know, I think that one of the things, like, I'm happy to hear that there was intentional relationship building that happened with the Little Earth community. I didn't really see that here in the subsequent time. And so I don't want us to fill the gap in a way that feels like an occupation then of the North Side, that makes Black Northsiders in particular feel further vulnerable to potential state violence. And so, you know, it's our job to figure out how to thread that needle, but, you know, I just want to make sure that I advocate for that on the record of, you know, how do we make sure that we don't have a protection gap in the same kind of way, but not do so in a way that's so heavy-handed that it actually makes folks feel unsafe in a different kind of way. I do have a question for the chief. So this is a little bit of a higher level question. So have there been any sorts of debriefings or dialogue in MPD amongst rank and file officers about what exactly is happening and why people are angry? Like being able to talk about the difference between, like, folks to understand the history of policing, why folks are angry, because we can train folks to de-escalate a situation, but if they are taking something very personally, that, you know, a group of people who are protesting are personally attacking an individual, it's very hard for that individual to hold all of that and then de-escalate it. And so, yeah, so I just wanted to ask, like, has there been any work on that? Will there be any work on that? Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, so Councilmember Cunningham, thank you for that question. So yes, there has absolutely been conversations that have taken place, not only from the leadership level with the MPD since last year and ongoing, but even in the roll call settings, which is probably where some of the most meaningful discussions and conversations take place. And so yes, there's been conversations about the feelings that many in our community feel right now. Our officers, our men and women, who I'm very proud of, who continue to show up in spaces, to continue to be there, to continue to be the guardians of our communities throughout the city. They've had those tough conversations and continue to have those conversations, and we need that. That's not only part of the community healing, but that's also part of our wellness for our men and women as well. I'm proud of the fact that, and even though it's been publicly known that we've lost a significant number of our officers that have left for their reasons, personal and otherwise, but for those men and women who continue to stay here, to show up, to say, I want to be counted, I want to make sure that I'm still here in service of my community. Very proud of them, and these are conversations that they're going to happen, and they know that. They have gone to scenes over the past year where they're there to render aid, and they've at times been met by people who've been angry with them, and no fault of their own individual sense, but so they've asked the why and where did we get to this point. And so those conversations continue to happen, and I will tell you that they're here. When we get to, as a city, to that point of reflection and healing, they are saying they want to be a part of that as we move forward. And so, but that can't just be a one-off. That has to be ongoing, and it has to be meaningful and authentic. And so that will continue to be a part of that transformational change that we're going to continue to be embarked in.
Great, thank you for that information, Chief. I really do appreciate it. I think that's also important for wellness, right? For folks to be able to keep space and perspective in order to be able to hold their own well-being in place as well, because that can be very emotionally challenging. And then the last question that I have is a little bit sensitive, but I feel like I'm just going to go ahead and name it for what it is. So peaceful, and this is kind of a little bit more in alignment with Councilmember Ellison's point or question earlier, is, peaceful protests also include Black rage from the ongoing trauma and pain that has been a result of structural and systemic violence. And but that kind of emotional expression is very upsetting to Minnesota sensibilities, to be so emotionally expressive, particularly with a negative emotion. So, it's good for us to have like a hard list of like, this is what's considered inbounds, this is what's considered out of bounds. I think that the emotionality, though, kind of maybe can gray that area a little bit. And so I think my bigger concern is around the mutual aid partners who maybe don't have a lot of experience interacting with communities of color, particularly Black community members who have experienced a disproportionate amount of state violence, for example. So how are our mutual aid partners who are coming in from other parts of the state, maybe less diverse parts of the state, how are they being prepared to come into this fairly unique circumstance and be able to differentiate, okay, there's a lot of emotionality here, but they're not actually crossing any boundaries. And this is not personal about me. Like, I guess that those, because I just feel like that's really key to de-escalation. So yeah, if you can just answer that. That's my last question. Thank you.
No, I appreciate the question, Councilmember Cunningham. So one of the unique things about having the unified command is all of those different agency leaders that was on the screen earlier today, National Guard, Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, State Patrol, and others. The wonderful thing about that is, unlike the remote participation we're doing this morning, we will actually be under the same roof, socially distanced, but we'll be under the same roof, and we'll be able to have these conversations. We'll be able to, if we're getting real-time information from a community organizer who might be hypothetically downtown Minneapolis at a gathering, and they're hearing or seeing something or expressing that there's some members of their group that that is having that emotional rage, as you described. Again, not criminal behavior, but emotional rage. Then we're able to talk real time that, okay, we can let that supervisor who's out at the scene, whether it's the bicycle rapid response team supervisor or whether it's the district first precinct supervisor, we can let them know that maybe perhaps what you're seeing in that group where there's 5 people huddled with one person who seems to be very loud and what have you, they've got that under control. Councilmember Mercado talked about utilizing and leveraging the capacity of our community. That's an advantage that we will have. So being under this unified command doesn't mean that folks are out in the ether kind of operating on their own. The benefit of unified command is we are all in that room together, real time, getting the real time information at the same time. And again, because it's unified command, but if it's happening in Minneapolis, because of the experience we have operating it obviously in our own city, we have the ability to get the right and more appropriate response to those situations. So it's not a perfect science, but it's one that we think that we have an advantage over. And again, knowing our city, knowing some of the dynamics, and also to these mutual aid partners, we've done these situations before, and so they've had some experience as well. But I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so much, Chief.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham, and thank you, Chief, for your very thoughtful responses as well. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. So first, I just want to thank all of you for the presentation today and sharing all the information. It's really helpful to have this out publicly, and I really appreciate all the work on preparing for this upcoming trial and all the thought and attention that went into it. And I also want to express appreciation for other jurisdictions as well who are willing to lend a hand when we've asked for it and are a part of this work as well. I do have 2 questions. The first would be for Commissioner Musicant. I appreciate in your opening slide really centering and recognizing the trauma from the killing of Mr. Floyd and the trauma from the subsequent event. In specific to the upcoming trial, I know it's something a lot of people are very anxious about, and when we're going to see it live streamed out there, that there's really a lot of triggering for many people going through this collective experience of this upcoming trial. And so I was wondering if you could speak specifically a little more around, are there going to be trauma support services, even mental health best practices shared with the public, those sort of things that can help individuals as they are processing and grieving and dealing with this moment that we're about to be in. Mr. Ruff, I'm not sure if Commissioner Musicant is still on the line here.
And I don't hear her either, Council Member. You know, as we are aware, we're about an hour past time, and so certainly others may have had commitments, but I will follow up with Commissioner Musicant and have a written response back to Council for your question. So thank you for that, Councilmember Johnson.
Great, I appreciate that, Mr. Ruff. And then the other one would be to you, you know, thinking of our city staff who have been doing more with less due to the budget cuts related to the pandemic, and certainly going through the civil unrest. In previously, you know, we've had 911 agents that were being in traumatic situations, 311 agents being yelled at, called names, abused. Same thing with first responders, and we've got department leaders that are, you know, working nonstop on planning and preparation. And so we came out of the civil unrest. There wasn't really a break for many city staff at any given point, and we're coming up to these trials. And I just am thinking about the risk for burnout among city staff, among leaders within our city, and wondering what intentional efforts are being made around addressing that and ensuring that folks have their batteries charged enough going into the trials that, you know, should things go south, which we certainly hope they don't, but should they, that there's that resiliency there to get through very difficult, trying moments as well. And in that question really is my encouragement that there is a focus on that in these upcoming weeks as well, to make sure that our city staff and our city leaders as well are supported in that way. And that includes all of you who've presented on this call today. I know it's really easy to say, you know, our city isn't resting, so I'm not going to rest, and to have that kind of an attitude. But we're also all human, and there are limitations to our own ability to work literally nonstop or without food or without sleep or in extreme high stress situations. And so I think it is important to be intentional, both as leaders, as the folks on this call are, and as well for our workforce to ensure that they're getting that kind of support that they need.
Thanks, Councilmember Johnson, and I just also want to highlight Chief Tyner's presentation of that awareness as well, and so I appreciate you highlighting that. We do have our Chief Human Resources Officer online, Patience Ferguson. She is heading up a group that is specifically and only focusing on employee health. So Patience, if you could take over, I appreciate it.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Councilmember Johnson, for continuing to remember the work that we are doing and that our employees are doing. So we, as Mark mentioned, our council, as City Coordinator Ruff mentioned, we have started a cross-departmental work group that is tasked to identifying the support that is needed to really support the employees in our enterprise. And where we are now is we just actually today sent out a survey to all of our employees to our directors and our employee resource groups. And part of what we're trying to do is find out what current resources that we have. And then the next step of that is to then look at what are some additional resources that we need. So that survey actually went out today. And then we're going to also have some listening sessions. We're meeting weekly. We have a timeline that coincides with all of the different kinds of things that are going to happen, the preparation all the way up to the trial and then afterwards. So we also are working with communications to identify multiple strategies. We'll be getting back some additional data from our employees, and then different departments have other employee groups over and beyond the employee resource groups. So we're hoping to get that data back by Friday, and then we're going to then see what are some of the other resources that we need to do to support our employees, recognizing that number one, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that we need to be very responsive. If things aren't working, we need to relook at what we're doing. And so it's going to be an iterative process that we can constantly be engaging our employees to see what additional resources that they need.
Thank you. I really appreciate that information. I would love a follow-up once you have those details.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sure. It's of critical importance for sure. And, you know, I just throw it out there. I don't know if there's you know, thinking about leave or different opportunities as well for folks, even short-term kind of things that, you know, they're able to get that time before the verdict even comes in, if that's helpful for them. As you know, it's different for each individual, but right. Really appreciate the attention to this. And if there's anything from a council side we can do to support, I'd certainly be interested in as well.
Well, we will definitely be in touch. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Coordinator Ruff. Thank you overall for gathering all this information and being able to do the Q&A with my colleagues. I think a lot of information has come forth from many different angles. I will just make sure that, in the spirit of making sure that we're always out there with our resources, limited as they may be, to those who need it the most. And in that, I just want to make a real quick question around our unhoused population, what sort of strategies we might have had in place, and then for purposes of people who are informally or formal kind of leaders or liaisons with those populations, who might they look to specifically from the city as a resource for information, or a situation arises? Do we have anyone specific, or do we have a sort of a consortium of people who are in that field specific to that population?
Thank you, Councilmember Reich. I know this has been an active conversation among our city staff and CPED in the housing policy area, and as well as the county staff who are primarily working with our unhoused population. So if Andrea Brennan is on the line, I would ask her to respond. If not, again, it's one of those that we can follow up in writing to you as council members as well. So Director Brennan.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Councilmember Reich. I will just say that we probably should follow up in writing. We are in the process of having conversations with county staff, and as well as shelter providers and other our outreach teams to identify contingency planning for people who may be unsheltered in the event that there are circumstances that could jeopardize, further jeopardize the health and well-being of folks who are outside in the event that anything happens. So this is on our radar. We are working on putting together some contingency plans so that we can move a lot more quickly than we were able to move during the events of May 25th, or after May 25th. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, and I just will add maybe some consideration and maybe some information that could be sent forth in terms of protocols that might be in place, or strategies regarding if there's a curfew. That could create situations that we want to be mindful and planful for as well, and in good communication again with those liaison people who are working so diligently with the unsheltered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Reich. Councilmember Johnson, I understand that our Health Commissioner, Gretchen Musicant, is back from her call and can answer your question if you want to just quickly repeat your question regarding mental health and our residents.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff, and thank you, Commissioner Musicant. Yeah, my question was really around, and I appreciate you recognizing that the killing of Mr. George Floyd was a traumatic event, and so were the events afterwards. And with this upcoming trial, a lot of people are probably going to be reliving that trauma, and so I'm wondering specifically what trauma support is going to be available to members of the public, and even things like mental health best practices, things like that that might help as we're all collectively processing, grieving, and going through this moment together with this trial.
Thank you so much for that question, Councilmember Johnson. I'm sorry I was multitasking and on another call at the same time. Yes, there have been conversations. There are conversations going on with philanthropy and others on the notions of setting up healing spaces amongst other supports for community. They're not in a place that I can give you any more details on that, but it is something we are diligently working on and have identified both the need and the interest in others helping us with that and sponsoring and supporting that work. So we'll let you know as things evolve, but thank you for raising that issue.
Thanks, and I guess I'd put in a request then through working in partnership between the health department and the communications department to really make sure that there are mental health resources included in city communications. I know that both CDC, FEMA, they have web pages that detail how to really take care of yourself emotionally, mentally during really difficult traumatic experiences. They've got the best practices already out there, so there's really not a need to reinvent the wheel. It's information I shared out with constituents last summer and would be happy to share resources as well, but I think it's really critical information to get out there, and it should be part of the communications out to the public.
Thank you, and it looks like our last Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Mark. I just wanted to really quickly acknowledge that I know that David Rubidor sort of came and took the institutional fall for the influencer thing, but I also wanted to say that, you know, a lot of folks saw that language, you know, and for whatever reason didn't register that it was such a bad idea, and that failure doesn't fall on one particular department or department head, and so just wanted to sort of just toss that out there and say, you know, we all sort of owe our it's a relatively small deal, especially since we're not moving forward with the program anymore, but that we all sort of owe our respective apologies to our communities over that. And then lastly, I did want to acknowledge real quick, I know this is not a decision-making space, but that you know, sometimes when we have these presentations on topics, especially this topic that a lot of people care about, it really makes it look like we are the decision makers on a lot of these strategies. And you know, my understanding is that this is primarily an effort that has been led by Commissioner Harrington, by you know, Hutch and the mayor, and so you know, it is a little bit regrettable that they couldn't be on this call to answer questions as well as some of the decision makers for what we're seeing coming out of this plan. But I did just want to state that, and I think it's important for the record. So thank you.
Thank you all as council members for your concern about staff. It's greatly appreciated, and your feedback makes us better at our jobs, and certainly we will have plenty of opportunity for additional actual decision inputs in the future. So thank you all for the time. Thanks to our residents, to our businesses who are paying attention, and as we've discussed today, it's really going to be our community who is going to be the ones who are bringing forth the positive energy, the things that we can celebrate as a community in terms of how we come together. So thank you all for your encouraging words, and have a wonderful day.